Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox Recording here, and welcome to the remote recording process, part 5. So in part 5 of this video series, I'll be diving deep into both the bass mix and the guitar mix of the song that Cameron Fleury and I have collaborated on. And here's the thing, the song was mixed completely within Reaper using mainly stock plugins. And as a matter of fact, you could download the exact same session that I'm demonstrating in this video for absolutely free. You can use it as a mix template for your own mixes, or even just to dive in and see all of my EQ and compression settings within the mix that you're gonna hear. The Reaper session is completely free, and there's a link below in this video's description. So without any further ado, let's take a listen to what the mix is sounding like. Okay, I'm extremely happy with this mix, and most of it was done again with stock plugins right within Reaper. So let's start off with the bass mix. If you look here, I have two bass tracks. One is called Bass Amp and the other is Bass DI. The bass amp is just my printed amp sim tone that I used when I was tracking my bass, and the other is the clean DI signal, just my bass plugged straight into my cheapo 2-channel interface. And the reason why I have two bass tracks here is one is my main tone and the other one is a bandpass distorted version to help the bass sound full on smaller speakers and to help the bass just cut through the mix in general. And as far as the routing is concerned, both of these tracks are being sent directly to my master fader. There's no bass submix. So for my bass amp track, EQ, super simple, just a stock Reaper EQ, rolling off all frequencies below 65 Hertz, all frequencies above around 5-ish K, and pulling out a little bit of lower mids, nothing earth shattering. I'm using the stock compressor rate within Reaper. Let's look at how much gain reduction is taking place. So around 6 to 10 dB of gain reduction, and I'm following it up with an L1 limiter by Waves, which is not a stock plugin, but it's not doing a whole lot. It's only here as a peak limiter. Let's look at how much gain reduction is taking place on my main bass track. It's just lopping off some of the excess peak and transient that I don't want on my bass track, not doing a whole lot. As a matter of fact, if you open this session on your computer with just Reaper, you're gonna notice the mix sounds near identical to my version. The plugins that I'm using that aren't the stock plugins are doing very, very little. They're just sort of like the extra 5% icing on top of the cake. And that's it for my main bass sound. But again, I also have my bass DI mixed in, which is distorted version of the bass signal. And I'm just using the stock amp modeler right within Reaper. It's set to the Dumble Overdrive Special Tweed Deluxe, which I guess is sort of like a guitar amp. And let's take a listen to what that sounds like on its own. So as you can hear, it's pretty funny on its own, but my goal here is just to saturate the mid-range. And if you look in this EQ, again, it's a stock Reaper EQ, rolling off all frequencies below 760 Hertz and all frequencies above around 3K. Again, I want to focus the distortion only on the mid-range, and I'm using the DI track for that. A little bit of compression. Let's look at how much. Again, around 6 to 10 dB of gain reduction. And I also had that L1 limiter on my bass DI just to help tame peaks, just like with my main bass sound. And that's it as far as my bass guitar is concerned. It couldn't be any simpler. Most of the tone came from just using a bass with fresh strings played aggressively. So now let's take a listen to my guitar tracks in solo. And before we do that, I just want to say this. There are two DI tracks that you'll have access to when you download the session, but they are not being used in the mix at all. The tracks that are being used are just printed versions of the amp sim that I like to use, which is the TSC Audio X50 plugin, and they're just baked into the files and printed as if I recorded live amps. This is a regular part of my workflow. I never like to mix with the amp sims live on the track. I want them to be printed, so I'm done tweaking and I just get right to mixing my guitars, again, just as if they were live amps or tube amps, mic'd up with a microphone in the studio. And let's take a listen to the guitar tone on its own. So if we look at my rhythm guitars, there is no processing on the tracks themselves, but they're being routed to a guitar submix called Guitars, where I have all of my processing going on for my rhythm guitars. Not my lead guitars, just my rhythm guitars. And both of my guitars are panned hard left and hard right. Do not be scared to hard pan your guitars. A lot of people seem to be concerned about this. Most pro metal and rock engineers hard pan their guitars. Here's the EQ for my rhythm guitars. Very simple, rolling off all the excess low end that I don't need, all frequencies below around 141 Hertz, and all frequencies above around 13K, and just notching out some lower mids, nothing crazy, again with a stock Reaper EQ. And I'm also using the stock multi-band compressor within Reaper just to control the palm mutes. And the range that I'm controlling is really between around 80 Hertz to roughly around, 300 Hertz. That's generally the range that will get out of control when the palm muting occurs. And with my multi-band compressor, I'm just lightly compressing that range to keep it in control. Let's look at how much gain reduction is taking place in my multi-band compressor. So as you can tell, it doesn't even kick into gain reduction until palm muting occurs, which is exactly what I want. I don't want the signal being affected when no palm muting is taking place. And just to be clear here, my rhythm guitars are being sent to my guitar submix via a folder track. In Reaper, you can just take any track, turn it into a folder track, and send whatever tracks you want to that track, and it acts as a submix. So up next, we have the guitar solo. Let's take a listen to it. Now the routing for the guitar solo is super simple. It's just going straight to the master bus, and no compression, just a little bit of EQ, rolling off all frequencies below 275 Hertz and all frequencies above around 7K. Most of the time for me, leads, I just want to be focused more in mid-range because the rhythm guitars are taking up most of the low end and top end, and I want the leads to be able to poke through nice and clear. And I'm using a delay plugin, just the stock delay within Reaper, and I'm doing it all via a send. So I'm just sending some of my signal from the solo track to my delay track, and again, the plugin I'm using is just the stock Reaper delay. And then finally, we have 3 other guitar tracks to take a listen to. There's one called Chorus Overdub. Let's hear that in solo. It's just acting sort of like a pad or a keyboard to help spice up the chorus. And I'm just EQing most of the low end out with the stock Reaper EQ and using a stock chorus plugin within Reaper just to add a little bit of flavor and interest to that clean guitar that's very quiet in the mix and helping to reinforce the guitar parts in the chorus. Now, aside from that guitar, we have 2 other guitar tracks at the outro of the song. Let's take a listen. Both are clean guitar tracks, just the clean amp sim printed right to the audio file itself. The one with delay is baked in. A lot of time with background elements, I like to just commit the sound at the source and move on so my mix can be nice and simple. And in this case, because of this, I don't have to use any delay or compression. And the only things I'm using are just a little bit of EQ, cleaning up the low end and the super duper top on both tracks. And it looks like both tracks are using the exact same EQ settings. Now, before we listen to the mix as a whole, in its entirety, I want to mention a few bonus tips here for you. If you notice during the clean section at the outro of the song, I cut out the bass DI track that had the distortion on it. And the reason is simple. The part is clean and calm and not heavy, and I didn't need that extra saturation in the bass to be taking place at the end of the song. It's sort of like automation in a way, except I didn't have to automate it. I simply cut the audio just so it didn't exist in that section of the song. Super simple, but I don't see people doing this much, and it really helps add dynamics to your bass tracks, especially if your song has clean sections, comp sections, heavier sections, all within a single track. And the second tip here is automation. If you look here, I have some simple volume automation on my bass DI, meaning the bass distortion. And the goal here for me is I wanted the grit to be more present during certain sections of the mix. Now, all of this comes down to my own personal preference and taste. I really wanted a more aggressive bass sound during certain sections of the verse and the chorus, and not in the intro and not in the reprise of the intro. And the way I went about doing this is just automated the volume of that bass saturation track. And the same goes for my guitar tracks. If you look at the automation on my rhythm guitar bus right here, I have a ton of volume automation, and I do this a lot just to breathe extra life into my guitar performances. A lot of times people struggle with guitar clarity and they mess around endlessly with EQ looking for some magical setting, when in reality, pro mixers do a lot of automation to breathe extra life and movement into their mixes. And again, if you download this Reaper session, you could dive deep and look at all of my subtle volume automation moves. And finally, I love doing a little bit of volume automation on my master fader. More specifically, I like giving the choruses a quick bump in volume right on the downbeats just to add a little extra impact when a chorus kicks in. And I'm doing this again on the downbeats of the choruses on my master fader. Very similar to what I do on my guitar tracks. So with all that being said, let's check out the mix of the song in its entirety. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. Now be sure to check out part 6 of this video series over on Cameron Fleury's channel, where I do an in-depth mix breakdown of the drum mix of this track. And once again, just as a reminder, you could download this exact Reaper session that you've heard in this video for absolutely free. There's a link below in this video's description. Click the link and it's all yours. And until next time, happy mixing.